The day my own daughter told me I was too old to live in the home I built with my bare hands, something inside me went quiet but not weak. I'm 73 years old, and most days my house feels like a living scrapbook. Sunlight drifting across the kitchen tiles, the smell of lavender rising from the garden, the faint creak of the old rocking chair my husband made before he passed. I've lived here long enough to know every sound this place makes, every season it survives. That's why I felt it deep in my bones when something between my daughter Maya and me began to shift. Her tone softened, but her eyes sharpened. Her visits grew more frequent, yet somehow less warm, as if she was checking on a project, not a person. There's an uneasiness that comes when someone you love looks at your life like it's something they can reorganize. I didn't know what she was planning, not then, but I could feel a storm forming in the quiet corners of my home, waiting to break. It's funny how a quiet morning can hold your whole life inside it without saying a word. Most days, before the sun fully settles across my porch, I sit with a warm cup of tea and watch the light ease its way through the oak trees. The steam smells like peppermint, fresh from the mint I grow right outside my kitchen window. Sometimes, without even thinking about it, I start humming the old gospel songs my mother used to sing while stirring pots of collard greens on Sundays. Those small, familiar routines have a way of keeping me grounded, like roots that don't let go even when the wind starts to pull. I didn't realize that wind was already shifting. Maya started showing up more often. Unannounced visits, soft knocks that didn't feel like the warm, daughterly drop-ins she used to make. She would step inside with a bright smile, but her eyes never stayed on me long. They slid across the room, lingering on cabinets, drawers, the locked chest under my bed that holds decades of family history. She'd trail her hand along the counters as if she were taking inventory of my things, not checking in on me. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing all this alone," she'd say with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're 73. You work too hard." There was a time when those words would have wrapped around me like a warm quilt, concern for my own child, the one I carried, fed, and raised with everything I had. But lately, her voice carried something else under it, something rehearsed like lines she practiced in the car before coming in, as if she were preparing for an audience I didn't know about. Still, I tried to push that feeling aside. I reminded myself this was my daughter, my only daughter. The same girl who used to sit beside me on the front steps, asking questions about the world while I braided her hair into neat little plaits. I remembered her at 16, hands on her hips, telling me she was strong because I'd taught her to be. That memory felt so warm it almost made me believe nothing had changed. But memories are gentle things. The present is not always so kind. One afternoon, Maya came over while I was trimming the mint near the porch. She walked straight past me, barely saying hello, and went inside. When I followed her in, she stood in the hallway staring at the linen closet, her phone in her hand. She tucked it away quickly when she saw me watching. "You know," she said lightly, "I worry about you getting overwhelmed with all this space. Maybe it's time to consider some help." "Help with what?" I asked. I kept my voice calm, but I felt a tightening in my chest. She waved her hand vaguely. "Everything, Mom. Cleaning, cooking, organizing. All the things you used to do so effortlessly." Used to. That word stung more than I expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but something in her expression stopped me. An impatience, a flicker of annoyance. Like she'd already decided I was struggling before I ever said a word. I swallowed whatever response I had and walked past her, letting the quiet answer for me. But the uneasiness stayed. That evening after she left, the house felt different. Too still. Even the ticking clock in the kitchen sounded louder, like it was trying to tell me something. I wandered from room to room, touching the back of the couch, smoothing the corner of a picture frame, grounding myself in things that had belonged to me long before Maya was born. When I reached the kitchen counter, I noticed a piece of paper folded neatly in half, something Maya must have left behind. I picked it up slowly, almost afraid to open it. The paper felt warm, like it had just been held. When I unfolded it, my breath caught. Across the top, in her handwriting, were 5 words. Things to sort before move-in. The room went quiet around me. Even the clock seemed to pause for a beat. Move-in. Who was moving in? And why did it sound like a plan I had never been invited into? I stood there holding that list, the peppermint scent from my tea still lingering in the air, and felt something cold move through me. Something was happening. And whatever Maya had in mind, she didn't plan on asking me about it. I tried to pretend that list Maya left on my counter was just a mistake. Maybe something she meant to throw away. But when she came back the following week, any hope of that washed away like rain off the porch steps. She arrived early in the morning, walking in without knocking, something she used to tease me about doing when she was younger. I was sitting at the table with my laptop open, finishing up a bill I had already paid online. The house smelled like oatmeal and cinnamon, the way I used to make it for her before school. But the moment she stepped through the doorway, she wrinkled her nose like something was off. "Mom," she sighed, "you forgot to pay this bill again." Before I could respond, my neighbor Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway with a jar of peach jam she'd brought over. She froze when she heard Maya's voice. Loud, scolding, the kind of tone children use on their parents when roles shift in their minds. I felt the heat rise along my cheeks. "No, baby," I said softly, trying to keep the peace. "I paid it online yesterday. It's right here on the screen if you—" But Maya cut me off with a raised hand, dismissing me like a child tugging at her sleeve. "Mom, please don't confuse yourself more," she said, her voice dripping with concern she didn't feel. "We've talked about this." Right in front of my neighbor. Mrs. Thompson looked at me, worried, unsure, because the seed had already been planted. That was the part that stung. Not the words, not even the accusation, but the way Maya delivered it with such confidence that someone else believed her. I swallowed the embarrassment, kept my chin steady, and thanked Mrs. Thompson for the jam. She forced a smile and politely excused herself, but I could see the question hanging in her eyes. Was I slipping? When the door closed, I turned back to Maya. "I am not confused," I told her quietly. "And I don't appreciate you speaking to me that way." She gave a small, practiced laugh like she'd expected this. "Oh, Mom. You always get defensive when you're overwhelmed." She tapped the table with her manicured nail. "It's okay. We just need to face the truth." But it wasn't truth she was pushing. It was a narrative, one she crafted without asking me a single thing. Later that afternoon, I caught her outside talking with a neighbor I barely knew. I heard her whispering soft enough to sound caring, but loud enough to be overheard. "Mama's slipping, bless her heart," she murmured. "I'm just trying to keep her safe." That phrase, "bless her heart," has a sharp edge when spoken by someone who doesn't mean a word of it. As I stood by the living room window, watching her gesture toward my home as if it were a burden she carried, something inside me cracked. Not broken, not yet, but cracked in that deep, private place where mothers keep the love they thought would never turn sour. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom with a lamp casting warm light across old photographs. Maya with a gap-toothed smile, holding my hand at her kindergarten graduation. Maya asleep on my chest when she was sick at 8 years old. Maya crying at 16 because she thought she'd disappointed me. I pressed my fingers to the picture frame and whispered to my younger self, "You raised her with truth. Don't let her rewrite it now." Still the doubt lingered, not about my mind but about hers. What changed her? What did she stand to gain? Those questions circled me like quiet shadows I wasn't ready to name aloud. But answers have a way of finding you even when you aren't looking. 2 days later, I heard Maya on the phone in the hallway. She didn't notice I'd woken from my nap. Her voice was low but firm, an edge I barely recognized. Yes, I told you," she whispered. "Once the paperwork is signed, it won't matter what she wants." I felt her words settle over me like cold water. Paperwork. What paperwork? And why did my wants suddenly not matter? The floor beneath me seemed to tilt, not from age, but from betrayal wearing my daughter's voice. The days after overhearing Maya's phone call felt strangely hollow. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet ache that settled into the corners of my home like dust. I tried to distract myself with small chores, the kind that used to comfort me. Wiping down the counters, watering the ferns, sorting through jars and spices in my pantry. The pantry was always my safe place, ever since my grandmother taught me how to cook standing right there by the old wooden shelves. But that morning, as I reached for a jar of dried rosemary, something slipped behind the stack of preserves. When I bent down to retrieve it, my fingers brushed against the corner of a sealed envelope, yellowed, familiar, and unmistakably aged. My breath caught. It was the envelope I thought I'd misplaced months ago, the one that held my grandmother's handwritten recipe book. She'd given it to me on my wedding day saying, "Lorraine, these aren't just recipes. They're reminders of who we are." I remember laughing then, not understanding the weight her words carried. But when I slid the envelope open again, the book felt heavier than before, as if time had been hiding something inside it. A loose sheet fluttered out and fell to the floor. At first, I thought it was another recipe, maybe the peach cobbler one she used to guard like treasure, but the handwriting was different. Still hers, but purposeful, almost official. My grandmother's cursive, steady even in her later years. When I read the words, the room seemed to tilt. It wasn't a recipe at all. It was a set of property notes. And a legal amendment naming me the sole owner of this house and the land around it. Not joint ownership. Not shared inheritance. Written in her fading pen, dated decades ago, witnessed and notarized. My knees softened, so I sat right down on the pantry floor with that paper in my shaking hands. A wave of memory washed over me. My grandmother leaning over a pot of simmering stew, telling me that land isn't just soil, it's story. That what we inherit carries more than our names. All this time, I thought the recipes were the inheritance. But they were the wrapping paper. The truth was tucked between the pages. Quiet, deliberate, waiting for when I needed it most. And suddenly, everything made sense. Maya's sudden interest. Her wandering eyes. The staged concern. The push for supervision. The way she hovered near drawers and mail piles. The list she left on my counter, cold as a checklist for a stranger. She didn't just want control. She wanted ownership. And she knew about the property rights before I did. A cold shiver moved down my spine, not from fear, but from revelation. Maya wasn't guessing. She wasn't suspecting. She was acting, because she had already seen something she wasn't supposed to see. For the first time, I noticed how often my mail had been missing. How many calls never came through. How many envelopes looked opened and resealed. I had chalked it up to the postal service, to my own forgetfulness, to anything but betrayal. But betrayal has a smell. And that day, it smelled like dust, old paper, and rosemary from the jar I had moved aside. I placed the recipe book and the amendment gently on the kitchen table and just stared at them. My grandmother's script danced across the page. Soft loops, careful pressure. Almost like she was whispering from wherever she rested. "Lorraine, don't let them take what was meant for you." As I traced her handwriting, a deep calm spread through me. Not peace, not yet, but a kind of steadiness I hadn't felt since this whole thing began. A feeling that maybe I wasn't confused or overwhelmed or slipping. Maybe I was just being hunted quietly. Later that afternoon, Maya breezed into the house with a tone that felt too sweet to be real. "Mom, I just dropped by to check on you," she said, moving quickly from room to room. Her eyes darting like she was inventorying the place. I watched her over the rim of my teacup. My heart wasn't racing. It was observing. She paused at my desk, her back blocking my view. I heard the faint rustle of paper. Soft, deliberate. "Maya!" asked, my voice mild. She jumped, then turned with a too bright smile. Just tidying up. But as she grabbed her purse to leave, her hand moved too quickly, too nervously. And that's when I saw it. A folded document, half hidden, being slipped into her bag. Before I could ask a single question, she bolted for the door like someone escaping with stolen treasure. And in that moment my breath left my chest. 'Cause I knew. She wasn't just hiding things. She was collecting them. After seeing Maya slip that folded paper into her purse, something inside me settled. Not panic, not rage, but a quiet, steady resolve. I stopped correcting her. Stopped defending myself. Stopped trying to win a conversation she had already turned into a performance. Instead, I began watching her the way an old tree watches a storm. Not afraid of breaking, just waiting to see which branches the wind intended to test. Over the next few days, I moved through my home differently. Every drawer I opened, every shelf I dusted, every envelope I touched, I handled them like clues. I pulled out folders I hadn't opened in years. Tax statements, medical records, property receipts, even the old insurance policies I kept, just in case. Papers that once felt like chores suddenly felt like anchors, proof of a life I had lived with clarity and purpose. Each document was a breadcrumb leading back to who I truly was, far from the confused, slipping woman Maya was painting me to be. I copied the recipe book pages first. Every handwritten line, every smudged corner, every margin note my grandmother had left me. The scent of old paper mixed with the faint sweetness of nutmeg from the pantry. And for a moment, that memory steadied me. I could almost hear my grandmother humming as she cooked, reminding me that recipes were instructions. But they were also protection. Those pages, with their loops and flourishes, were proof of lineage, intention, and love. And the legal amendment tucked between them. Her quiet way of passing down strength. When I had my copies neatly tucked into a large manila envelope, I drove to the church office late one afternoon. The sun was low, soft and gold, brushing its light across the stained glass windows. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and old hymn books, comforting scents I had known my entire life. I found Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer who'd served our community long before Maya was even a thought. He was sitting behind his desk, the same oak desk he'd used for decades, its surface worn smooth by a lifetime of steady hands. When he saw me standing in the doorway holding that envelope, his face softened with concern. "Lorraine," he said gently, "you look like you're carrying more than paper." I sat down and placed the envelope in front of him. I whispered, "my daughter is planning something that could take everything away from me." He didn't interrupt. He simply opened the envelope, put on his reading glasses, and began to study the documents with the slow thoroughness of a man who understood the weight of silence. I watched his eyes move from line to line, his expression shifting from interest to concentration to something harder to name. As he read, I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Every second felt stretched thin. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder, each tick landing in my chest like a small warning. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and tapped the recipe amendment with his finger. "Lorraine," he said quietly, "this is significant. Very significant." A heaviness settled in my chest. I didn't know if it was relief or fear. Maybe a mix of both. "What is she trying to do?" asked, my voice small. He let the papers rest between us, their edges glowing softly in the afternoon light. "Maya is building a case," he said. "She's painting a picture of you as mentally unfit. If she gets the right signatures, or if she moves quickly enough, she could file for emergency guardianship." I felt my breath catch. The word guardian echoed in my mind, sharp and cold. Me. The same woman who raised her, worked 2 jobs, put her through school, and taught her how to stand firm. The woman who still tended her garden, paid her bills, remembered every birthday and anniversary. She wants control of your assets, Lorraine, he continued, voice steady but grave. And if she files this before you're prepared. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You could lose everything overnight. The room fell quiet. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice calm. So what do I do now, Mr. Hargrove? He folded his hands, leaning in with a look that held both compassion and warning. You gather every piece of truth, he said softly. And you don't let her know you're preparing. His words sank deep into me, not frightening me but focusing me. Maya wasn't misguided. She wasn't overprotective. She was desperate. And desperation, I realized, could be dangerous. By the time I got home from Mr. Hargrove's office, the sky had shifted into that soft lavender shade that always comes just before dusk. Usually it comforted me, reminded me of evenings spent shelling peas with my grandmother on the porch, her soft humming floating through the air. But that night, the color felt heavier, like it was settling onto my shoulders. I walked inside and sat at the edge of my sofa, my hands resting on the manila envelope that now carried the weight of my whole history. The truth wasn't whispered anymore. It stood in front of me, clear as daylight. Maya wasn't just preparing something. She had already acted. Mr. Hargrove's voice echoed in my ears. She may have filed for emergency guardianship. Those words clung to me, taking shape with every breath I drew. Emergency guardianship. My own daughter trying to take away my right to choose, to live, to think for myself. And for what? As I stared at the envelope, a slow, aching realization settled in. Maya wasn't trying to protect me. She was trying to use me. My home, my assets, my independence, as a lifeline for the financial trouble she had been too proud to admit. I thought back to the strange phone calls, her rushed visits, the way her eyes darted around my house like she was inventorying her future. All those small moments I brushed aside now lined up like the edges of a puzzle finally clicking together. I reached for my grandmother's recipe book, gently opening its worn pages. The familiar smell of vanilla, cinnamon, and old ink lifted into the air, aromas that always carried me back to Sunday afternoons in her kitchen. I ran my fingers along the handwritten notes in the margins, her looping script spelling out measurements, substitutions, and little reminders like, "Don't rush the dough, it needs time to breathe." And tucked between 2 pages, like a secret she left only for the right moment, was the legal amendment, naming me the sole owner of the property. Her signature, though faded, held the kind of strength only a lifetime of wisdom can give. That book wasn't just a recipe collection. It was a shield. My grandmother must have known one day I'd need to defend not just my home, but my dignity. I pressed the book gently to my chest, letting her presence steady me. When I met with Mr. Hargrove again, he treated the recipe book like sacred scripture. He placed it carefully on his desk, examining the amendment with meticulous care. "This," he said softly, tapping the page, "is what your daughter didn't count on." He didn't raise his voice or gloat. He simply began building the quietest, strongest case I had ever seen, piece by piece, like someone restoring an heirloom with patience and respect. As he worked, I sat silently, letting my heartbeat slow. I thought about all the years I had poured myself into Maya. Birthdays, school plays, scraped knees, late-night talks, sacrifices she never even knew about. I thought about the pride I felt watching her grow into a woman. And now, here we were, a mother and daughter standing on opposite sides of truth. The emotional spike came unexpectedly, like a sting I didn't see coming. I realized Maya was willing to paint me as incompetent, confused, even unstable, just so she could hold the deed to this house. The thought burned, not because of the house itself, but because of the ease with which she tried to erase everything I had lived, built, cared for. Still, I reminded myself to breathe. My grandmother always said, "Strength isn't loud, baby. It stands up even when it's quiet." So I sat straighter, steadied my heart, and let Mr. Hargrove gather every detail. By the time I returned home that evening, the air had cooled. My porch wind chimes tapped softly in the breeze, sounding almost like a warning, or maybe a reminder. Just as I stepped inside, I noticed an envelope slipped under my door. My name written in unfamiliar handwriting. My stomach tightened even before I opened it. Inside was a notice. Formal letter. Maya had scheduled an in-home evaluation. For the very next morning. My hands shook around the paper, but I kept my breath slow and steady. So, she was moving fast. Faster than I thought. I barely slept the night before the evaluation. The notice lay on my kitchen table, its sharp edges catching the morning light every time I walked by. It reminded me of a blade, not one meant to cut flesh, but one meant to slice dignity. Yet even as a soft ache pulsed in my chest, I kept hearing my grandmother's voice whispering, "Truth don't need to shout. It just stands." So I stood too. I prepared my home the same way she prepared her Sunday dinners. Slowly, intentionally, with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. The evaluator arrived early the next morning, a gentle woman with tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too many families torn apart by fear, greed, or misunderstanding. She spoke to me with respect, asked questions with care, and observed everything, from how I walked to how I brewed my tea, to how I recited the dates of my grandchildren's birthdays. I answered calmly, steadily, because the truth doesn't shake. She wrote notes in her folder, nodding subtly as if she already sensed that the story she had been told didn't match the woman standing in front of her. The next days moved like slow water, quiet but persistent. Papers were filed, hearings were scheduled, and finally a court date was set. I folded the notice and tucked it inside the recipe book, right between the peach cobbler and cornbread pages, as if placing it there gave me strength from the generations before me. When the morning of the hearing finally arrived, I felt something strange, something close to peace. I dressed myself with care, smoothing my navy blouse, tying my scarf just so. My hands didn't shake. My steps didn't falter. By the time I walked out to meet Mr. Hargrove, who was waiting in his old, faithful sedan, I felt grounded, like roots had grown beneath my feet overnight. The courthouse was cold, as courthouses often are. Sterile walls, polished floors, echoing footsteps. But I carried warmth with me. My grandmother's recipe book held lightly against my chest, the faded ink of her handwriting pressed close to my heart. When we entered the courtroom, Maya was already there. She didn't look at me at first. Maybe she couldn't. I took my seat, inhaled slowly, and let the quiet settle around me. The hearing began. Witnesses stepped forward. Neighbors who had seen me gardening every morning, singing as I watered my basil, carrying groceries with ease. The evaluator testified next. Her voice was steady, professional, but compassionate. "Ms. Wilson is mentally sound," she said. "Fully capable of living independently. There is no evidence of cognitive decline." I watched Maya shift in her seat, her shoulders tightening with each word. Then came the documents, my documents. The ones she never expected me to find. The legal amendment tucked inside the recipe book, the letters she hid, the assessment request she filed behind my back. Each item placed on the table stripped away another layer of her plan, until the truth lay bare between us. I didn't glare at her. I didn't whisper anger. I just looked at my hands and felt a deep, tired sadness wash over me. Not the kind that takes hope away, but the kind that marks the end of a long road you never wanted to walk. The judge leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Ms. Maya Wilson," he began, "your petition is dismissed. What I see here is not concern for your mother's well-being but an attempt at coercion and control." Maya's eyes finally met mine then. And in them I didn't see victory or anger. I saw a frightened child, the same one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and clutch my arm until the lightning stopped. But some storms we must let our loved ones face alone. The judge granted me full legal protection over my home and property. No guardianship. No interference. No further petitions without evidence the court found credible. It was over. Not loudly, not triumphantly. Quietly. Like justice often is. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sun was warm against my face. Warmer than it had been in weeks. I walked slowly toward the steps, feeling each one beneath my feet, steady as a heartbeat. The breeze caught the edge of my scarf, lifting it gently, almost playfully. At the bottom of the courthouse stairs, I closed my eyes and let the light settle over me. She forgot I taught her strength, I whispered, and I still remember how to use mine. Then I walked toward my future the same way I walked into that courtroom. Quiet, steady, unshaken. Because strength, real strength, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply returns home.